Miss Maria Baltar.
Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and welcome guests. John Siegenthaler picked up the phone, and instead of hearing hello or simple how are you, he heard the voice telling him, who the hell is Diane Nash? You need to call her, and you need to tell her to stop. You need to tell her what's waiting for the Freedom Riders when they get there. Call her. The voice on the phone, none other than Robert Kennedy, who at the time was Attorney General of the United States. John Siegenthaler was his assistant. Diane Nash was a 23-year-old student at Fisk University, a predominantly black university in Memphis, Tennessee. The Freedom Riders were a group of individuals, brave individuals, who had decided to defy the Jim Crow laws at the time. They had decided to see if they could uphold the Supreme Court ruling that said if you traveled from state to state, you were not subjected to segregation. In other words, you could get on a bus, you can get on a train, and you can travel from one state to another, and you could go into the train station or the bus station, and you wouldn't have to sit in a black section if you were a black individual. You could sit anywhere. That's what the Supreme Court ruling said. In the South, that ruling was ignored. So two buses decided to test that. They departed from Washington, D.C., and they went all the way down south. They met with some resistance through the Carolinas, some resistance through Virginia. It wasn't until they got to Alabama where they really got resistance. One of the buses was met by the Ku Klux Klan. The individuals on that bus were beaten severely, so much so that many of them went to hospitals. The other bus, in a small town called Anniston, was stopped. The bus driver got off and ran for his life. Then the individuals there began to knock out the windows and throw firebombs in. The individuals on the bus were about to be burned alive. If it weren't for the fact that the individual who threw in the firebomb got scared because they thought the bus was going to blow up and they all ran, that enabled the individuals on the bus to get out and save their lives. After those two buses were met with such violence, no one else wanted to get on. And this is where Diane Nash comes in. This young 23-year-old student inspired her fellow students, both black and white, to get on another bus and travel down to the south again. She knew that if the buses stopped and if no one went back, that it sent a message that violence could overcome a righteous cause. And that is what Robert Kennedy was trying to stop. At the time, they were trying to work for the Cold War, and the last thing they needed, they thought, was this movement that was getting headlines, not only in the United States, but throughout the world, and making the United States look bad. The Russians would have headlines saying, see, the Americans don't treat their people so well. They think they're so wonderful, but they're really not. So when John Siegenthaler called her, she said, no, the bus is going. She goes, you realize some people might get killed. She goes, I know. We already signed our wills. We know we might get killed. She ended up going to jail when she got held up. It didn't start with her in this big movement. She did small things before. She was one of the instrumental people who would go into the Memphis lunch counters when only whites could sit, and she would sit at that counter. Small things. And then when she would get a fine, she wouldn't pay the fine. She was always defiant. But it was that moved her to a point where she was able to inspire her fellow college students who dropped out of college to take on this bus. Once other individuals saw this movement, more buses started coming. So a movement that almost got stopped kept going for this one person. I was surprised when I read and saw the documentary that I had never heard of Diane Nash. You hear about so many other people have no little consequence in the United States that become household names, but not Diane Nash. At work, I asked my coworkers, I said, I'm going to give a speech tonight on Diane Nash. Have you heard of her? All these college-educated coworkers that I have, many of them have masters, a couple of them even have PhDs, and none of them heard of her, myself included, not heard of her. So what inspired me is the fact that one person kept this movement alive. It's a movement that would have moved anyway. It's had a moment and it had its time. It was something that was going to happen in anyway. But she kept it moving. She got arrested for it. She spent time in jail for it. So many people spent time in jail. Hard jail. They went to difficult prisons in the South and did hard labor for this movement. But this movement that started in May of 1961, with all the pressure and all the headlines, by November of 1961, a law was passed saying that you could sit anywhere on the bus. And it was because of this person who did this. And that's what inspired me, the power of one. I know there's many individuals here who dedicate their time to helping causes, and they realize that people can help by just dedicating their time. Sometimes I think I become discouraged when I see individuals. You hear about teenagers that start off multi-million-dollar corporations, and you think to yourself, you become overwhelmed by some of the grandeur that some of these students do. But what I say to you is something that happened to me just a couple of weeks ago. I worked downtown and I was sitting at a red light, and I look over and I see a young man, probably in his 20s. He had a hatchback open and he had a cooler. And in that cooler, he had food and he had water. And he was talking to the homeless people in downtown Tampa. And we all know, if you've ever been downtown, there's a lot of homeless people. And it's a cause that I find that appeals to me so much. How do you help the homeless people? And it becomes overwhelming. And here he was, after work, a cooler. He probably spent $25 on bread, lunch meat, and some water. And he was talking to them. And he offered them sandwiches. I could see him shaking their hands. And I could see him just taking the time to talk to these individuals. So for one afternoon, one person made a difference in their lives. He didn't solve the problem, but he made a difference. And I think sometimes we forget that we can also make a difference just by dedicating a little time. So I encourage you, if you have a cause, dedicate just a little time and you'll make a difference. Thank you.